this is going to be a recording for Chapter 14, HR Metrics and Workforce Analytics from HRIS by Kavanagh and Johnson, 2018. So, we're going to talk, if we talk about workforce analytics and HR metrics, that's basically how an organization uses its data for making better decisions. Now, the capacity for any organization to manage its workforce is limited by the type and quality of data that's available to the managers. So good information can help create a better foundation and a better understanding about how HR can actually support the strategic direction for an organization. Data alone cannot be the answer. You need to make sense of that data. So in this chapter, we basically going to be talking about how best organizations will not just collect more data, it's how they're going to leverage that data to make better decisions for solving different business problems. So rather than starting with the data, organizations to start with an HR or an organizational problem or opportunity that they're trying to solve. So workforce analytics and big data are only as effective as the problems that they're trying to solve. So how they can use that data to solve different problems is what we're going to talk about. So more specifically, this chapter actually focuses on the history, a little bit of history of HR metrics and workforce analytics, and how these efforts have made and have been enhanced by the advent of HRIS, and how HRIS are helping us make better use of HR metrics. Now, let's start off. So there's a small little case study here that you can read up later. There's a quotation which says, I have found that the largest single difference between a great HR department and an average one is the use of metrics. Bar none, there is nothing you can do to improve yours and your department performance that exceeds the impact of using metrics. So this is how important using metrics is. So as you can see, the other two quotes by Mark Twain, for instance, there are three kinds of lies: damned lies, and statistics. So that's a funny one. And war is 90% information, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now understand the importance of metrics and statistics cannot be ignored, especially with respect to how well an HRIS can provide you those these days, and how well you can use those to leverage that information to make better decisions. So HR metrics and workforce analytics have become a very big topic these days. There's a lot of interest rising in it, and that's especially because of the implementation of HRIS systems, because now we have access to third-party and first-party databases through which we can gain access to a lot of data that can be used for these purposes. So HRIS builds on the capabilities of having faster and better computers these days and better connectivity, so that you can get more data from across your organization and make decisions based on that. So a lot of factors have combined together to make HR metrics and workforce analytics an important thing. Now let's look at a little bit of the history. So a lot of work has gone into the effectiveness of an organization organization's employees, and it can be traced back all the way to the scientific management of Taylor in 1911 and the industrial organization psychology by Munsterberg. We already talked about those things in your principles of management courses, right? So especially all the way up to World War II. So there's been a lot of work in that. So the widespread use of HR metrics did not occur until the work that was done by Dr. Jack Fitz-Hines during 1984 specifically. He actually wrote a book called How to Measure HRM, which is now in the third edition, 2002. And it's considered to be one of the most important texts when it comes to HR metrics and the various formulas that are created to calculate them. So there are about a set of 30 metrics that were developed by the joint efforts of the Saratoga Institute and the American Institute for Personnel Administration, which was the organization that eventually became the Strategic HRM, the Society for HRM. Now, these metrics that were developed, these 30 metrics, are actually listed in table 14.1. So you can look at different metrics, which are revenue per employee, expense per employee, compensation as a percentage of employee, benefits cost as percentage of compensation, retiree benefit, loads of them. Time to fill jobs, cost of hire, time to start jobs, all of these, absence rate, involuntary separation. So these are adapted from the same book, and these have been a very important contribution into the field of HR metrics. So you'll see a lot of these metrics actually comprise the HR Metrics Toolbox that can also be seen on table 14.2 that was published by the Society of HRM in 2010. So it's pretty difficult to look at because it's actually pretty small. So I'll zoom it in. There we go. So lots of specific formulas given for, say, for instance, absence rate can be calculated by the number of days absent in a month divided by the average number of employees during that month, multiplied by the number of work days, multiplied by 100. So measures of absenteeism can be done by absence rate. You can get cost per hire to get the cost involved with hiring a new person, human capital ROI, which is calculated by this particular formula. So you get the ROI for the employees. So there are loads and loads of HR matrices that you can actually get out, get through these formulas. These are extremely useful. So this too was adapted from the same book. I'll go back and actually talk about the HR metrics further. So there are lots of more detailed approaches for measuring and benchmarking employees' behavior, such as turnover, as well as creating more HR metrics. So there are loads of HR metrics available out there, and these 30 that were created by FitScience are actually one of the most important ones. Now, so what exactly is the use of these? So there's a lot of them. For instance, there's the balanced scorecard that actually helps gives managers greater thinking about metrics. The balanced scorecard recognizes the limitation of organizations and their heavy reliance on financial indicators of performance. So that's where this comes in. Balanced scorecard focus on developing leading indicators of performance, including customer satisfaction, process effectiveness, and employee development, as well as financial performance. So lots of things. About the same time, another work actually worked on it, which is the work on high performance work that was done for systematic management of HR. That too is an important aspect, which is the HR scorecard. That was what they developed. Now, there are limitations of these historical metrics, which is why the new ones are important. While computing communication software infrastructure supporting HR metrics analytics has gone through a lot of change since 1990s, the metrics themselves have stayed the same. They haven't changed a lot. So the computing power has increased. The data that we can create now has increased. But unfortunately, all of these methodologies that were used, these HR metrics themselves, have not changed. So the current corporations are capable of capturing a lot more data through a lot of electronic supported HR processes, and we can get a lot more data, but these HR metrics have not changed to reflect that. So currently the popular HR metrics were developed way before the computing infrastructures that we have today were created. So as a result, these HR metrics these metrics were not fully utilized, and the new ones have not been utilized at all. So if you look at the HR metrics that were mentioned in figure in table 14.1, you see that these are actually not all that impressive, because these are very simplistic. It highlights that it also highlights another weakness, which is that there was a lot of emphasis on data that was already available through transactional system and accounting system. The formulas show you that a lot of the data that is shown in these HR metrics is mostly from the accounting and transactional and operational systems. So these metrics emphasize mostly on cost and calculating on costs, such as, say, for instance, headcount, turnover, and stuff like that, which are all proxies for costs. So every managerial decision was therefore focused back then in cost and benefits consequences instead of any other variables. So as a result, these metrics and analytics systems only provide information about cost and were not very valuable for managers. So if managers were only provide information about cost, they were only going to think along those lines. Then HR would be just a cost center that would destroy the entire purpose of trying to create HR as a transformational unit of an organization. So second, these early metrics also had another problem. They often aggregate data to the level of the organization. So they are mostly about summaries, about averages instead of specifics. So as such, they offer very limited information that can be used for diagnosis within the organization. So for instance, organizational turnover rates is heavily influenced by the turnover rate in the organization's dominant job category, because obviously there's some department that is the major chunk of your organization's business, and obviously if you're going to get averages, that chunk is going to have more of an effect on the average rather than the remaining smaller departments. So finally, another problem with them is that these only provide data after the event has occurred so these are like feedback metrics. So they tell us what has happened posthumously in retrospect rather than prior to something happening. So these feedback metrics can be effectively used to signal the problems, but they are not very useful for real-time remedial help. So then we need to talk about what we have these days. What kind of metrics do we have these days? What kind of workforce analytics do we have these days? So let's understand the workforce analytics practice. Workforce analytics has become an umbrella term that includes a lot of activities. The example of most of the activities that happen under workforce analytics are these. One is, of course, HR metrics, which are the data, the numbers that actually reflect the descriptive details about those processes and outcomes and all. So success in recruiting new employees, for instance, is an example of an HR metrics. In the domain of HR, there are lots of attributes reflect the HR programs and the quality of it. These are all HR metrics. For instance, the number of applicants attracted by the HR department, the turnover rate, the head count, the cost of conducting a training program, all of this is HR metrics. Workforce analytics refers to the strategies for combining these data elements into metrics and for examining these metrics and the relationship between them. So these analyses can inform the managers of the changing situation, of the changing human capital situation within their organization, and how that can be impacted by their decisions. So understanding what opportunities or problems managers can face can help determine what the organization needs to do and what data elements are important for them to capture and all. Then comes the concept of benchmarking. So obviously benchmarking is very important for an organization. The Saratoga Institute was the first one to have a systematic benchmarking methodology, because they develop in an effort to develop information on standard HR metrics, to help the management and human capital, they started benchmarking it. So benchmarking data is useful because it provides what the organization's standing is compared to others. Where do they actually stand? But the challenge in using HR metrics for benchmarking is that the organization's HR practices and the use of their HR actually reflect current challenges that the organization is facing. Because of that, as a result, most organizations have an HR department, but the specific functions being performed by this department are going to be very different within organizations. So it's very difficult to come up with standardized benchmarks that can be compared across different organizations, because each one of them does their things slightly differently. So direct comparisons of HRs, comparisons of external HR benchmarking data to one's own organization may not give you the right number, because obviously whenever you're comparing with this external data that's available to you, it may be very different from how your organization does things. So it may be difficult to make that comparison through this benchmark, but still it needs to be done. Data mining and big data analysis. So interest in mining human capital data has increased because now we have better HRIS systems and we have better computational power. So data mining actually refers to finding hidden patterns within data that we haven't hitherto recognized, that may help us identify unrecognized causal relationships between our data that can help us understand how one thing is affecting another, how one thing is causing another. To help us enhance our decision making. It helps us identify different causal mechanisms. So data mining actually uses correlation and regression methodologies to find how one group of variables can actually affect another one, and how two variables or more variables are related to each other, whether they're moving in the same direction, positive or negative, or do they even have a statistical correlation among themselves. So an example would be, say, the identification of a correlation between employer job satisfaction and employee turnover. So that's pretty obvious, but that's just an example. So you can find examples of correlations between pieces of data that you may not even have thought are related to each other or are causing one another. So data mining has a number of different applications, but the biggest warning before we use that is that it may even uncover a lot of nonsensical correlation. I mean, because it's just data, something may be increasing while another thing may be increasing, and you might think that there's a link. For instance, older employees tend to have longer tenures, obviously. So they're older, they've been here longer, so they have a longer tenure. Or say, for instance, taller employees make better leaders because your data set says that most of the people with a certain height have mostly been leaders, but there's no correlation between the two things. But the data will show that. So that may happen. So, but you need to, these are called spurious relationships, or relationships that are nonsensical, that make no sense, that are useless. However, the interest in big data these days has been because of the data that is being created and the rate at which it's being created, and the variety of data that's been created. So the volume, the variety, and the velocity, which is the speed with which is been creating, are the three V's why this is happening. So we have a lot more data being created. For example, that data generated by Amazon, Google, Facebook. So many of these organizations have found out that there's a lot of data being generated on a regular basis, and these can be analyzed to find a lot more details about their customers' preferences, their various characteristics, the various processes through which they go through. So the same can be applied in HR. Managers can actually better understand their customers, their competitors, even their own employees better. So big data can be seen valuable because it offers these three things, which is volume, which is the amount of data, the variety of data that they have, and the speed with which this data is actually created, which is the velocity. So large amounts of data, and large variety of that data, and the velocity with which this is generated helps us understand our employees and our customers and our competition and even our industry better. So that's why it's important. So it can help us, for instance, in the case of social media, it helps us understand, the data can be mined to understand who may be high performers, and to see the validity of selecting employees, through accessing all of this data. Maybe we can even use this information for that purpose. So velocity is, of course, the speed with which we are generating this data, so that it can help us make our decision cycles shorter and actually make them more accurate. That's some of the things that we can do with big data. Then there's predictive analysis. Now, predictive analysis is the goal of what most metrics and analytics efforts want to do. Predictive analysis involves creation of different models to understand the future, to estimate the effect that will happen because of environmental influences, or the estimating the consequences of what will happen if we make certain changes. So if, for example, an organization wants to see a relationship between job satisfaction and employee turnover, the HR could use this data to suggest different modifications that can be done to the employees' current work conditions to see if that results in more satisfaction or less, and maybe if that can reduce the turnover in some ways. So predictive models can help us estimate the effects of different changes that we make. How will that have an effect on certain other variables? So it involves identifying different indicators of organizational outcomes and then seeing how they can be influenced and how those influences can be changed to see what will happen to the outcome. So that can be helpful in determining whether a certain model works or it doesn't work, or what exactly will need to be done for a particular variable to be changed or to be affected. Then there's another area which is called operational experiments. So evidence-based management is a movement which actually says that decisions by managers should be made on the basis of data. It shouldn't be just on the basis of models and things about how things work or how they believe it works. They need to be based on actual data that's proven themselves. So one of the most effective ways of developing evidence on creating data that can help us make better decisions is through operational experiments. So you need to conduct different experiments. So there's a research paper that actually talks about how Google uses the same thing to understand what works on a website or what doesn't. So that's done in Google Ads platform, where you compare the performance of two different types of ads and see which one performs better. That's A/B testing, right? So that's done. So similarly, we can do the same for an organization. You can do different operational experiments. You can see how a certain variable has an influence and what is the result of it, and maybe perhaps continue with it or continue with a different intervention where you made some different changes. Maybe you change the work time period, or maybe you change the work environment in a certain way in a certain department, while in the other you give them flexi timing. See what works better for having better performance within a week or a month or a year. Then we come to another concept called workforce modeling. Now, workforce modeling helps us understand how an organization's human capital would change based on the changes that happen in an organization's environment. So you're trying to model how a workforce is affected, right? So this change may be a change in the demand of the product, or a new product coming into the market, or a company shutting down their business in a certain area, several ways. So this actually is the modeling of how the workforce changes or how their attitude changes based on the different things that change within the environment of the organization. So now let's look at the effectiveness of each of these, of HR metrics, workforce analytics, and the organization's effectiveness and how that changes. So changes in data available to the organization helps them make better decisions and helps them take advantage of what is available to assess by these days. So despite a lot of metrics being available and the frequency with which they are available to a lot of managers these days, there is still a question of how effective or how significant or how effective they may be for the organization itself. So often a lot of these individuals report the such problems like they're like, I don't know, they talk about the inability to get managers to tell them what information they need to be able to make any sense out of it. They realize, they also point out at different other problems like how would you read the HR metrics data, and or which ones would you include in a particular report, or even to understand or convince managers to tell them whether they've received such a report or not. So these are some issues that happen with the HR metrics. Now there's a view that is quite troublesome, but there is a common view, which is that most managers see that this increased interest in HR metrics analytics is simply because, well, there seems to be a requirement to report more metrics because everybody wants them to be. These managers don't really see a real advantage coming out of this, and that's a common problematic view that has developed among managers. They assume that this is all useless. So the assumption behind this perception is that assessing and reporting HR metrics results in better organizational performance, because if we monitor more stuff, we report more of the metrics, it will somehow perform better. But it is not clear that generating and reporting HR metrics will actually result in better performance. There is no link between them. Just because you're reporting more about these metrics and doing more workforce analytics does not magically make you work better. It's only when you monitor and then take corrective or feedback or even motivating actions to actually see any kind of change in your performance. So another common misperception is that the objective of workflow analytics is to somehow extract some value from HR data. That's not true. In this approach, the process starts with the HR data, and the objective is to use this data to create more metrics, and these metrics would somehow be combined to do some kind of analyses and then report them to the higher management. Now, this view was dominant because the development of new metrics was happening in the last few years. However, there's a problem with this approach. The problem is that it's not clear just by looking at this data which elements or which piece of data is useful and which isn't, and how would they contribute to analytics. Now, these approaches have two common and predictable outcomes. First, individuals tasked with coming up with various HR metrics in an organization struggle to understand how to report those metrics and how to calculate them. And second, these organizations then report a lot of metrics, and there is no prior decision on which ones to report and which ones are useful. So they're wasting a lot of time and effort in trying to come up with them. So a more effective approach would be to start with the problem. See if there's a problem that you need to solve, and then look at what metrics can be created to understand this problem better, or to monitor this problem better, so that we can solve it. So that's where we will determine what metrics to look at, and then look at which analytics we need to perform to identify precisely. So instead of creating metrics and then hoping to use them, we need to look at the problems and then find which metric can be created to solve that problem. So the difference between the data first and the problem first approach is quite a bit then, right? So the second one, which is the problem first, is more focused on analysis that are targeted to specific managerial problems, increasing that these analysis will actually help with decision making instead of just reporting the metrics. So maximizing the impact of these analytics efforts, what would be required for that? So an emphasis on improving managerial decision changes the dynamics of this analytics. So it's not simply good enough to do metrics analytics, we need to make them useful. So how will we do that? A usual problem that we see is that many of the currently popular HR metrics do not provide a clear impact on the decisions themselves. We don't see whether these HR metrics are actually having an impact on the decision that we make. So we need to connect that. So more effective workforce analytics efforts are those that actually focus on what these analytics will be useful for. So each workforce analysis effort has some kind of ROI. Therefore, these individuals who work in an organization who are responsible for the workforce analytics need to recognize whether there is any potential ROI of these analytics efforts. The challenge is to identify the analysis that will actually help the managers. So that's the bigger question: which efforts of these analytics will actually help the managers make better decisions? So HR metrics and workforce analytics comprise an information system, obviously, because you can't do this without it. An information system can only have an impact on the organization if the results of the information that they generate can actually help the manager make better decisions. So no information system, including HR metrics analytics, generates any ROI unless and until the managers are able to make a decision that gives them a better performance or better results. So managers may feel the organization is no better off than would have been otherwise, but they need to understand that they will indeed be making better decisions because of these. So if managers must make different or better decisions, it is very useful how this will actually happen, right? So decisions can be different in three ways. First and most common, of course, is that managers can make a different or a better decision than the one they've made before they received the result of the analysis. So we can compare those and find out whether this piece of HR metrics or workforce analytics is actually helpful. Because if the manager made a certain decision before receiving the information, and they made another decision after receiving this decision, we can compare the results of those decisions and see which one worked better. Second, the managers can improve decision making by making the same decision that they would have made before receiving the information, but they can make this decision a lot sooner. Very important, right? So if I have the right kind of HR metrics, I may be making a decision much sooner than I would have had I not gotten that information. And sometimes time is very important. A delayed decision, even if it's the right one, if it's delayed, is useless. Third, the managers can improve the decision making by not making a new decision when one is not required. Even an inaction is important sometimes, right? And the HR metrics can help you there too. By getting those numbers, we can decide whether we should or should not even make a decision. That's also important. So in some instances, managers can misread the data, misinterpret it. They could confuse random variability by thinking that something is actually changing, and that's just random. That that those fluctuations keep on happening in an organization. So they may conclude that a change is actually required, and they mess up. In other words, there is a false positive or a false negative in this scenario. The use of control charts, for example, is a good example of decision support tools that managers can use when a process is heading out of control, so they can intervene, but which and so that they can decide whether these are normal outcomes or not. So that's an example right there. So this is pretty useful in that way. So triage in evaluating workforce analytics opportunities. Triage, by the way, means very quick medical support or medical help or emergency medical help especially in a war condition or in a battlefield. So there are many ways that workforce analytics can be focused in an organization. So it's very important to recognize that while many analysis actually require same amount of analyst time and effort, not all of these opportunities actually apply to workforce analytics in an organization offer the same kind of ROI. In other words, you may be putting in a lot more effort than the ROI that you're getting from it. So a lot of potential returns on workforce analysis can be very useful, can be very dramatic. In our large organizations, for instance, that are just starting with workforce analysis, the analysis may be very useful in identifying a lot of opportunities that can generate hundreds of dollars. But there will be opportunities that can return only hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for the same analyst's effort. So organizations that want to generate greater impact from their investments in the analytics need to also develop the capacity and discipline to understand where the analytics should be applied, where the analysis should be done using those HR metrics. So what are the best for workforce analytics opportunities, and how can we find them? So one approach is to isolating better opportunities is to focus on the right kind of workforce analytics domains. So more broadly or more generally, workforce analytics efforts fit in one of the three possible categories. They could be HR process efficiency based analytics, analysis being done to do HR process efficiency, or they could be operational effectiveness, doing the right thing, and even strategic alignment. So each of them represents a different domain where organizations can and should be conducting workforce analytics. So let's look at these one by one. In HR process efficiency, which is where most of the work is being done right now, is the HR administrative process efficiency. These metrics focus on how well the HR department or the organization as a whole is fulfilling critical HRM processes, and how are they supporting the organization's effectiveness in doing so. So metrics in this area might include cost per hire, for instance, days to fill a position, the percentage performance reviews completed on time, the HR department's cost as a percentage of the total cost and stuff. So in many cases, base level proficiency in HR process efficiency analytics is the basic criteria. I mean, it is the most basic of all HR analytics, which is focusing on HR process efficiency. So in many cases, how well an HR process is executed is only limited by the potential it has on the impact the HR processes are executed. How well an HR process is executed has only a limited potential to impact the organization's effectiveness. So sometimes how well an HR process is done does not really have much of a huge impact on the organization. That may be the case. So how well an HR process is executed is more important, but often it is less critical than ensuring that the organization has the right processes in place to make it happen. So more than whether or not an HR process efficiency is happening, more than how much it's impacting the organization's effectiveness, what is important is ensuring that there is a process to begin with. So HR process efficiency is not a big deal, but still it needs to be monitored. It still can be useful, and workforce analytics should focus on those. Then comes the operational effectiveness. These are analyses that are focusing on organizational process improvement. Here the focus is to find opportunities that can help improve the operational outcome of the changes that the HR department does, the intervention that it does. So what it requires is, it often requires these analysts to look at the technical competence of the HR professional. For example, what happens in these kind of analysis is using this, we could say, to help managers determine whether changes to recruiting or selection or employee deployment or training or job design or employee motivation or engagement or even retention could help managers accomplish their objectives or not. These outcomes are obviously beyond just the HR. These are related to the business unit and to the operational metrics. For instance, the percentage of on-time deliveries, the overall operational downtime, the lost time accidents, or the units lost, or the cost per unit. So it doesn't necessarily include just the HR, it includes the entire organization's operations. So analysts in these circumstances play more of a consultative role, where they help in identifying opportunities to use HR interventions and improve the performance of the organization. Then the third type of activities for analysis are called strategic realignment. Now these are more commonly known as HR planning or HRP, which has already been talked about in chapter 9. So these planning efforts focus on long-term plans to ensure the replacement of the labor power. So it's all related to those kind of analysis. For example, Boeing engages in a number of these efforts to ensure that it will have the sufficient number of engineers in the future to staff their operations. So they look at it, they plan for it. So strategic realignment also actually includes and extends the use of HRM analytics to plan for new situation circumstances. So new situations can occur because when an organization goes through some strategic change, or they become merged with another organization, get acquired by someone, they do some kind of divestiture, they move out some business, or they enter a new area. So all of this, these require analysis and evaluations of the ROI, and that falls in the category of strategic realignment. So in sum, all three of these areas of expertise are important, but the emphasis of workforce analytics is shifting from the basic HR process efficiencies towards more operational effectiveness and to the overall planning related workforce analysis. So HR managers must first be able to actually show that they have the capacity to use metrics analytics to improve their operations. Otherwise it will be useless. So they need to look at how well they're using these before they are able to listen to other people's recommendations. So HR managers and professionals must work very close together with their business partners and operational department partners within the organization to help improve their capability to achieve these desired outcomes. Workforce analytics to improve strategic alignment is not really developed these days, but the other two domains, which is the process efficiency and organizational effectiveness, have been. So we need to look at those. So we've already talked about this aspect, which is starting with the end in the mind. One of the key to creating workforce analysis that is actually useful is by first identifying the problems or opportunities. So one effective approach to this method is an effective approach to surfacing different problems or to identify different problems is through either through existing data or discussion with the managers who are facing the greatest challenge. And then once these areas of opportunity are identified, the next step is to identify organizational outcome that's linked with that opportunity. So understanding what an outcome variable would change if the organization was to solve a particular problem is the right way of doing things. So if I solve a particular problem, how would that change the output of my organization? That's how I'll identify which HR metrics to focus on. So example, outcome variables might be, say, things like sales of the organization, the levels of scrap that you're generating, the on-time shipments, stuff like that. The second step is to represent that outcome using numbers. So we want to see how we're doing in those numbers. This will this will be easier if the organization already has metrics, right? So if not, raw data can be collected for this particular purpose, and that could be converted into HR metrics. Third, if possible, we would like to look at the dollar values to differences and the values of these different outcomes, in a more of a monetary method. So we need to assign actual numbers as well as actual value that these outcomes have. Now obviously sales are already a dollar metric, but the value of, say, on-time shipments, you will need to understand how exactly that can be translated into money. If you're delivering products on time, how does that translate to money? So these data are actually critical when you're looking at they're very useful when you're looking at new opportunities. So as I said, triage meant emergency medical services in a war situation. What happens in a war situation is the medical staff actually identify which soldiers can be saved, which one will feel better, or which can be made to feel better, and then they can very soon go back to the battlefield, and which ones will require a longer time, and which ones they can do nothing for which they will just be ignored, and well, they're lost, they cannot be saved. This is exactly what we need to do. In other words, triage means to prioritize. So triage is the process of examining these opportunities and seeing which one should be given more priority. So examining different data on the different level and distribution of this existing outcome data, it is possible to identify which opportunities give us the highest outcome. So we can shift to focusing on those more than the others. So it's important to remember that many workforce analytics projects will likely consume the same amount of analyst time, but the kind of advantage that you gain from it may be different. So you have to look at that. It's not about how much amount of time will be spent, but how much returns you'll get. So thus the potential benefits rather than the cost of conducting these analysis should be your focusing decision. This is how you'll be making a decision of how advantageous it is. So organizations should encourage analysts to spend their time on projects with very large opportunities instead of smaller ones, because they're going to spend the same amount of time. Sometimes that may happen. So this is also important because not every analysis will completely solve the problem. Sometimes you'll realize you'll need to do more analysis or multiple analysis to solve the same problem. So, but capturing only half the value from, say, a $5 million opportunity will still be a beneficial thing. So even if you're doing half of it, that's still creating a lot of opportunity and a lot of value for you, a lot of ROI for you. So once an analyst actually understands the importance of the outcome, the focus then shifts to understanding the factors that influence those outcomes, and two, identifying the available intervention options and their costs. So once we know the outcome we are getting or we want, then we want to see what influences that outcome, whatever it may be, and then we can identify what kind of interventions possibilities we have to influence those outcomes, or the factors that influence those outcomes. So the system of factors that influence outcomes of a interest, for example, a downturn in the economy on sales, that's a factor that will obviously have an impact on the sales. If the economy goes bad, the sales will go bad. And the types of available intervention, for example, changing the sales incentive system. So those are the possible solutions, decisions that you can make. So a lot of organizations don't understand the relationship between these two things. Many organization systems have a lot of sources of influence on their outcomes, and many organizational systems have multiple sources of influence. So many organizational processes are actually systems that have several intermediate outcomes. One outcome leads to as an input in another. So because it's a whole process. So this sequential process can be seen in figure 14.1, for instance. Like this, there's an initial outcome, then there's an intermediate outcome, then there's another action that is taken, then another intermediate outcome, and so on and so forth. So that may happen. Anyways, so you need to ask yourself, why do you care about a certain particular outcome? If, for instance, you want to do the analytics for it, so why do I care about this outcome? So if the answer is that it directly leads to an increase in revenue or reduction or cost or a sub-competition, you obviously have an ultimate outcome. So outcomes may be linked together, and one may be influencing another until a final outcome. So if not, it is important that the analyst continue to ask why questions until the ultimate outcome is identified. So why is this outcome important to me? Because of this reason. Because, say, for instance, I want to know the outcome in one particular scenario. For instance, it could be the outcome is a sales, for instance. So why do I want to know about sales? Because obviously that generates money. Why is that important? Generating more money, because I need to make profit and I need to cover my costs. Again, that's an outcome. So eventually you'll come to the actual ultimate outcome that you're trying to achieve. This is how it works. So this process is particularly important because obviously human resource interventions, which is the changes that you will make to achieve those outcomes, which is what your analytics will tell you, will almost never directly change the ultimate outcome. So you will have to change something in between. So obviously if you want to increase the sales, if that's the outcome that you're looking at, you will need to make some changes in the way that your Salesforce works, and in order to do that you will need to make some changes in the environment. So you need to understand that the ultimate outcome that you want, which is increase in sales, cannot be changed by you directly. You will need to change the various outcomes that come before it and that indirectly or directly influence that ultimate outcome before any real changes can happen. So that maybe it may be the case that the objective of this intervention is to make some changes in some other intermediate outcome. So say for instance, an example could be that in most cases the objective of the intervention is to cause some change in the employee behavior, that is some action or decisions that impact an outcome which may then influence some other outcome, and so on and so forth. So frequently the exact sequence of expected effects of many HRM interventions is not known. So sometimes you may affect one thing and it may lead to another and another, and maybe to some other variable. So this can lead to for instance certain scenario. For instance, we engage or do some intervention, we make some changes which let's say we call them X, which will improve some other outcome called Y, and then something happens and we become more profitable. So obviously that's not how it works. We need to understand the connection between X and outcome Y and how that actually translates to the ultimate outcome. So we may be ending up and making bad decisions. So in those instances, analysts should work with managers to identify different assumptions that are associated with these links of things with one another. That's very important. So let's look at an example now. Let's look at an example to understand how analysis actually works. Let's look at a case of staffing to better understand this whole discussion that we've had. So up to this point we've only talked about how about the role of metrics and workforce analytics to support HR and employee related decisions. So now we need to talk about how that can be useful using an example. So let's look at it an example of staffing and understand this better. So let's look at a particular example given in a research paper as an example where we're talking about staffing, which is actually not just one decision but rather a sequence of decisions. So the staffing cycle framework highlights a sequence of 7 high-level decisions that actually occur in every staffing position or staffing decision in an organization. Now these decisions are listed in table 14.3. You can look at these decisions, D1 to D7. The first one is the job seeker's decision to enter the workforce. The second decision is the organization's decision to create the position. Third is the job seeker's decision to apply for the position. The fourth is the organization's decision to extend an individual job offer. The fifth is the job seeker's decision to accept the job offer. And the sixth is the organization's decision to retain an employee if they actually apply for it and they are given the acceptance. Or of course in the negative this could be that they refuse to, they keep a employee, they may ask him to leave, they fire them. And D7 is the job seeker's decision to remain in the position, or this person's decision to leave the position. These are some 7 different steps in the framework, and let's look at those then. Now in table 14.3 these are actually offered. Now these are not decisions. If you were to look at these decisions that are listed here, they cover a time period from the beginning, from the initial intent of an individual to join an organization all the way till leaving. But it's not a sequence of events. It's in table 14.3, for instance, again we're talking about some events. For instance, D1, D3, D5 and 7 are actually controlled by the job seekers, while D2, 4 and 6 are actually controlled by the organization decision makers. When they are not in control of a decision, the job seeker organization decision making acts as an influence of those decisions. So some of these decisions are going to be controlled by the job seeker, while others are going to be controlled by the organization. And in the scenario where these cannot be controlled by the organization's decision makers, or when they are not in control of a particular decision, the job seeker or the organization is then influencing the decision. So they may not be controlling it directly, but whatever they've decided is going to influence the other party. So this framework is very useful for guiding the workforce analytics efforts for staffing, because it helps us identify the intermediate outcomes of the whole sequence of staffing. So that can be evaluated, and it helps us identify the component processes, the important processes, and who's going to play an important role, For example, consider the outcomes of D3, D4 and D5. Now we're going to look at these specific decisions. D3, just to remind you, the job seeker's decision to apply, while D4 is the organization's decision to actually offer and the job itself, to extend the job offer to that particular person, and D5 is for the person to actually accept that job. Now let's look at it. Let's evaluate the recruitment effectiveness, which is D3. Now D3, as I said, is the decision by the job seeker to actually apply for the position. Now the outcome of that decision from the organization's perspective is the creation of an applicant pool, right? That's the outcome. They create an applicant pool for which the particular job seeker will apply. That's the outcome of the decision from the organization's perspective. What they'll end up when D3 happens is they'll have lots of CVs. They will have lots of requests by a lot of job seekers for getting a job. Now the applicant pools have attributes that can be used to determine how good the outcome of the D3 was. So obviously if I receive a lot of CVs, I can look at them and the quality of them and then decide whether the decision to offer this job was a good one and whether I did a good job during my D3 process. So if whether the outcome of it was good or not. So traditionally this is often evaluated by examining the number of applicants. So if you have a larger number of applicants, you'll be like, cool, see, so I did well by offering this. So having enough applicants to ensure that a job is filled is of course an important outcome of the recruitment process. Not only does the organization want the process to result in a hire, but they want to hire an employee who through their work will be able to help maximize the value for the organization and contribute to the organization. So not only does the organization want to attract more applicants, they want to attract more high quality applicants, and because every applicant that applies will require at least some amount of expense to process their application and their entire candidacy process. Obviously the organization does not want a large number of low quality applicants. They want a large number of high quality applicants because there's cost involved in doing this entire process. So table 14.4 for instance actually offers an example of a workforce analysis that provides an insight into the quality of recruitment outcomes for a particular position. So this is an example right there. This analysis includes information about the number of applicants that they attracted for each job position and the capacity to contribute to it. So for instance, they have a recruitment required ID score, and then they have less than 10 or 10s or 20s. These are the total applications for each of these positions that are numbered. So these data highlight the substantial difference in the recruitment outcomes across requisition IDs. This rec ID score is the requisition ID score, and it's the total score. So and show the number of applicants that attracted to a job listing, which is requisition. So in this case, the number of job applicants that we receive may not be strongly associated with the number of high quality applicants. For instance, in the case of requisition 22473, which is the first one, it resulted in almost 319 applications, as you can see right here in the total applications. So there are 319 applicants for the job position number 22473, but generated very few high quality ones. If you look at it, there are lots of low quality ones, because if you look at the scores, most of the scores, these are scores by the way, so these scores are less than 10. There were no applicants of less than 10 score. In the 10s there were 37. In, for instance, the 50s score there were 68. There was only 21 of those applicants were in the 80s, while 8 were in the 90s. So you can notice a lot of low quality applicants, right? Now in the case of, say for instance, in other requisitions 23549 or 27158 or 27160, you'll notice that for instance here we have scores in the 70s, 80s and 90s. So even though it only has 110 applicants, they're mostly high quality ones, or even in this case mostly high quality ones. Same goes for 27158, high quality ones, right? So it's important to gain, because obviously that's an outcome, it's important to get high quality ones. So this is a this is an analysis of D3, right, which are the decision steps. So these types of data can be used to guide better decisions. So maybe there's something wrong with our recruitment process, so we need to improve that. For instance, an organization may seek to replicate the same kind of recruitment outcomes for another requisition. We may want to do the same kind of things. Whatever worked for one requisition, we got good quality applicants, we would want to do the same for another scenario. Now let's look at D4, which is evaluating the effectiveness of job offer decisions. So let's look at those. So let's talk about how evaluating effectiveness of the job offer decision itself, which is D4. Now D4 is the organization's decision regarding who among them or among those who have applied will actually receive the job from their perspective. So as noted before, the outcome of D3 represents the starting point for D4 selection process. In D3 we receive the applications of several people. Now they have to decide who they will be, who among those who have applied for the job will actually get the job offer. So they have to now look at the outcomes of D3, as you can see, are now affecting D4. So it will have a downstream effect on the outcomes of the selection decision. So the objective of selection is to identify the applicants who will be the best performance. However, because the selection activities have a certain cost, there is an objective to try and get the best decision given these costs. So we know from the selection research that an optimal set of selection devices can be identified for any job. So we can actually easily identify that. So because we'll know. So to maximize selection validity, which is to make sure that we find the right people and making the most correct hiring decisions, that is, the strategy that maximizes validity is to administer all useful selection devices to all applicants and then obviously get the score. So we try all the possible ways and evaluate all the candidates for the job and give it to the one who does it the best. So offer should then be made first to those individuals with the highest scores on the various tools, for instance the interviews, the exam, some kind of on-job test, whatever you have done, right? So although this approach actually maximizes validity, it also maximizes the cost, because if you're testing everyone just to get the best score, this may be the most correct one, but this is also the most expensive process. So organizations need to find an optimal combination of the validity and the cost being spent to get that validity, to find that right candidate. So there's a cost involved. So one common approach is to use multiple hurdle selection systems. A multiple hurdle selection system, what organizations do is they administer one or few devices at a time to applicants. They identify those who get good scores in this and then remove the rest and then move the remaining ones. So it's like an elimination. So they're left with lesser people for each possible test. So they administer the next device. So for instance, the first one may require them to be an IQ test. The next one may be an on-job test. The third one may be a job-related specific task test. So in each of them, the number of applicants is cut down because only the high-performance ones are left. So that's how it's done. But however, the validity is lost because not every device is equally valid. Maybe someone's not that good with the IQ test, but they're very good with the job performance, job task performance test. So that may happen. So a lot of applicants that may ultimately actually be shortlisted may not be top performance, and they might get dismissed during the process. So obviously those applicants might lose out because they're losing out because they're not scoring very high in the first few tests and they're eliminated. So this is obviously going to be made even worse by the incentive to use lower cost devices, because then you'll be like, let's save some costs and have simpler tests which are cheaper to administer, which will again result in bad candidates being accepted and the good ones being lost, or lost in the muddle of all the bad ones. So high quality applicants might even get lost out because your tests are just not good enough because you're trying to cheapen out on them. So the objective of workforce analysis in support of selection decisions is to help organizations first understand and improve the validity of the selection process. Validity here refers to the association between the scores, which is the predictor, scores on a predictor, which is the selection device, and the future potential job performance. So what is meant is you chose the right kind of test, the valid kind of tests, to measure the ability of a particular potential employee, and then that ends up being the right kind of decision because they turn out to be really good when they performed in the job. So the validity of selection practice is typically evaluated by examining how individual scores on a selection device, say a resume review or a standardized test or an interview, whatever it may be, and how does that correlate with the job performance scores. For example, a situation where the predictor and future job performance are correlated are XY by 50. So that's shown in figure 14.2. Now that's right here, right? So that's a predictor. Now looking at this particular diagram, figure 14.2 uses an oval shape to represent where within the plot area the greatest density of points will occur with a correlation of x and y, which is at 0.50. The horizontal and vertical lines divide x and y axis into low versus high scores on the predictor and low versus high scores on the outcome, with high scores to the right or above lines respectively. Now if you look at it, this actually shows you, this is the predictor right here. So how good the predictor is in getting the job performance right, that's quadrant 1. So the higher scores on the job performance based on the predictor being better, that's what it's basically talking about. So quadrant 1 represent the people who scored high on the predictor and were hired and were also high performance. Quadrant 3, for instance, represents people who did not score that well on the predictor and therefore were not hired, but would have been poor performance had they been hired. So those are good, right? This is where you've made the right decision. So the predictor said they're not good job performers, and they're not. So that was a good decision. This would have been a good decision. Now in quadrants, represent people. Quadrants 1 and 3 represent correct hiring decisions. Correct ones. Quadrant 2 represents individuals who scored well on a predictor, but will not be high performance on the job. For instance, here the predictor said they performed well, right? Because this is the x-axis, but the job performance was low. Same is true for quadrant number 4, which actually says that the predictor said the test that you administered, whatever interview or IQ test or whatever, said that this guy did not perform well, but had they been hired, they'd perform really well. So that's in quadrant 4. So the proportion of hiring mistakes here is indicated by the proportion of the area in blue that falls in quadrants 2 and 4. So in 2 and 4 you got very few pieces. In 1 and 3 you got a bigger chunk of the blue part. So higher selection validity results in the tightening of distribution points, reducing the number of instances falling in quadrant 2 and 4. So that's that. To evaluate the selection device validity, the organization actually requires data on the correlation between the applicant score on the selection device and their future job performance. So you can see that organizations are unlikely to hire all individuals in the applicant pool, so they only need a few. There are several imperfect solutions to this challenge. How can we solve this? First, organizations can examine the magnitude of relationship between the predicted score and the outcome for the data that they have, job performance for hires only. Obviously, this can be a potential solution when organizations hires large number of individuals for a given position, right? So we can see the job performance, and later on in the next time we try to hire, we'll know the correlation between those two things, that this test was a good predictor or a bad one. So second, organization can choose to rely on selection devices that have been developed by outside organization for which large validations already happened. So use tests that are standardized, used by other organizations. That will be a better predictor of the right kind of people that we hire. Anyways, those are some methodologies. So then we come to D5, which is evaluating the job acceptance performance. So if organizations want to maximize the acceptance rates of applicants, now once they have made the offer to an applicant, they want the applicant to be hired, right? They've spent a lot of money to identify which ones are the good ones. Now they've offered them. Now they don't want to lose out, otherwise the money is lost that was spent to try and find the right one to offer the job to. So job acceptance performance refers to the extent to which the organization is able to influence their preferred candidates into accepting a job offer. So in the same example, the outcome of D4 is a list of individuals to whom the organization is willing to make a job offer, and in D5, obviously, those are the people who might accept it, right? So if all preferred candidates accept the job offer, extended job acceptance performance is maximized, and that doesn't always happen. Everyone you offer does not always accept. So traditional means of assessing the job acceptance is through the yield ratio, which is the ratio of the offers accepted compared to the offers that were given. For example, an organization extends 5 jobs for a particular position and has 3 of them that are accepted by those people. So that's a 60% yield ratio. So a yield ratio does have limitations, obviously, because specifically yield ratios assume that every job offer that is accepted and likewise every job offer that is declined have the same impact on the organization, and that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the job that was declined was the good one, was a bigger impact one, and while the other one wasn't that high impact. So if the organization is given number of positions to fill, failing to gain acceptance of an offer often means that you will now be giving it to the less higher scorer from the pool. So you'll be having a lesser employee, a lower potential, right? That too is a problem. So the magnitude of the opportunity that exists for an improving job acceptance results is based on the number of individuals who do not accept the offer and the difference in the job performance between the potential initial offerees, that the better ones, and what we ended up having, right? And the individuals that ultimately accepted the position. So if an organization experiences few instances of rejected offers or recruits sufficient numbers of highly rated ones, then there is a little difference in the performance potential between the original offerees and the acceptors. So there's a lesser difference between the performance we will get now from those who accepted it and those who and the performance we would have gotten from those who did not accept it, who rejected our offers. So if the job acceptance results are poor and recruitment results are poorer in getting higher scores, so if then automatically improving job acceptance results may be an important opportunity, right? So again, these are connected, D3, D4, D5, right? So if we don't identify the right kind of jobs to offer, we don't get a lot of applicants for it, not high quality ones. If we don't get high quality ones, we can't choose the right ones for the right kind of performance. The same thing applies here. So in table 14.5, for instance, they're telling us the job acceptance and performance. So here's the score and pool 1 of applicant scores, and then there's the pool 2 of applicant scores. Now if you were to look at it in the same way that we looked at the others, we find that the 3 top scoring individuals from each applicant pool will receive the offers. Now consider the following 2 situations. First, let's say that the top applicant in each pool does not accept the job offer, then while candidates 2 and 3 do. So in response to the non-acceptance, the organization offers to the 4th best candidate, who then accepts. The amount of regret in each case can be initially scaled by the difference in the applicant scores between the non-accepting and accepting. So we subtract the score of the best one with the one that we are now getting, and we get the kind of loss that we've made. So if for instance the best one doesn't, the 108 one doesn't, and 107.5 does, so we get 102, right, from the first one. So 108 minus 102 means we lose the potential of 6. So we would have lost on that score. That's what it's saying. So that's what it's saying right here. So we lose 6 points, right, which is the highest overall scoring applicant. The number of smaller number of top scoring applicant results in a much more substantial loss. So if we lower even further from first to the 4th, which is 110 minus 85, we lose a lot more. Look at it. You lose a lot more from 110 of the highest possible score we could have gotten to the lowest one that we got in applicant 2. So in pool number 2, that's 85, right? So that's 25%, 25 points of loss. So consider the alternate scenario where a job acceptance performance is worse, resulting in the 1st, 2nd and 4th best applicants not accepting offers, but the 3rd, 5th and 6th accepting in pool 1. This results in a loss of 20 points. The score shown. However, in pool 2 the result is much more substantial of 52. So in pool 2 we had even worse scores. So we lose out more if the good ones don't accept the jobs. So analyses like these can actually be very useful for organization, especially those who want to estimate the precise value of the differences in scores in dollars and increments that they lose out. So in many cases this may not be currently feasible for some positions, but the value of working towards such estimates can actually be seen. So we'll get a lot more advantages from these kind of analysis. We can understand the scenario even better. So assessing the financial impact of staffing decisions, the utility analysis, that helps us understand in financial terms the same thing. Thus far, the staffing analysis described examining changes in intermediate staffing outcomes, such as increase in applicant quality, acceptance rate, first choice job offerees, and retention of high performing employees. Now, improving these outcomes is important, but these metrics do not provide an outcome that is readily interpreted in dollars, right? So we need to look at it in dollars. So discussion of utility analysis provides a better way of doing this. We need to look at utility analysis. Utility analysis requires 3 pieces of information. The first is an estimate of where the applicants fall in the distribution of potential employee performance, right, which can be calculated by finding the relative location of the applicant's quality score compared to all the other quality scores of all the applicants. Second is an estimate of how low of how imperfect the estimate of applicant quality is likely to be, right? How many mistakes we can be making when we are evaluating the applicant quality. This is provided by the estimate of the validity of the selection process. And the third piece of information we need for this utility analysis is an estimate of the value of differences in the job performance. So jobs that have a high autonomy, where individuals have greater permission to make decisions, have greater potential for increasing the variability in the outcome. If they're done really well, then obviously it has a higher outcome. If they're done really bad, there's a very huge negative impact. So low autonomy positions have less impact because there's less power given to them. So in this utility analysis, the differences in the value of better employees can be determined by estimating the difference between the location of two employees and distribution of all employees. So they've shown a score which is applicant 1, score of applicant 1 minus the score of applicant 2 divided by the standard deviation of the applicant score. So if standardized difference are calculated, the value of these differences can be found. So in utility analysis, we get this standard deviation. How far was the applicant from the standard deviation, or rather the mean, or rather the very center of the entire distribution, right? So this value will vary across jobs according to a number of factors, such as the amount of autonomy and responsibility given to that particular task. So say for instance, for a job with a salary of $50,000, this approach would yield an estimate of about $20,000. So given these inputs, differences, an initial rough estimate can be come up, right? We can come up with this formula to get the utility. So the utility here comes out to be $10,000. Thus, when triaging selection opportunities, greater opportunity comes from A, we get it there, which is from high volume of hires, right? You need more hires, low validity of current selection processes, and C, the value of standard deviation of performance for a given position. So these data can be evaluated together with the data on the validity and the cost, right? So this workforce analytics can be used to find the exact value of the hiring decision based upon the data that we have. So how can we build a workforce analytics function? Now, when taking metrics and analytics efforts into question, the organization needs to answer is, what problems is the organization trying to solve, and are they worth solving? Are they going to come up with better opportunities for us? So organizations have a lot of opportunities for increasing effectiveness. They need to choose where to spend their time to do this. So that's very important, and understanding why. So management scholars have come up with a lot of theories of how organizations work, right? So most organizational members have their own ideas about how their companies work. But these theories can help us create a framework for identifying what is important, what is not. So choices for outcome measures to assess are often based on personal theories about how things work. For example, a company employees often identify intermediate outcomes, such as they say flexible works or a change in supervisors or as outcome of interest. So intermediate outcomes become more important to them. So, but these are all intermediate. So for example, there are lots of intermediate indicators of things that employees believe lead to more important. For example, changes in two of these intermediate outcomes, in any two intermediate outcome may lead to much happier workplace. However, in some cases, these intermediate outcomes may not be the best ones to be focusing on. So this situation occurs when changes in those decisions impact some intermediate outcomes, but do not have the expected impact on the final outcome. So an important test of whether it's appropriate or test of appropriateness of an intermediate outcome is the why test. When one considers a potential outcome variable, you need to look at whether or not it's very useful to see why the organization is interested in that outcome. If the answer is because it impacts some other variable that influences an important outcome, then you need to look at then a lot of care needs to be taken into ensuring that the changing intermediate outcome also impacts some other final outcome. So organizational factors such as pay and working conditions that have influence through their effects on other intermediate variables are very reasonable to be assessed and evaluated and studied. So if we understand that subsequent impact in these factors have an impact on some bigger outcome, then we are beginning to understand those things. So changing factors such as pay and working conditions will have an intermediate outcome, but may not produce any effect on the final outcome of the company's profitability, for instance. So we need to analyze intermediate outcomes and see where they lead and how, and then further on where they lead to the ultimate outcome. So employee turnover of valued employees, for example, is usually identified as an important organizational outcome because of the costs associated with it, right? So we don't want people leaving. So it is among the most frequently assessed variable, and it's reported in a lot of HR metrics in organization. Most managers even say that there is an excessive turnover is a huge significant problem, and high levels of turnover are very disruptive to an organization. If more people are leaving, your operations are going to suffer. The answer to the why turnover is important is that it disrupts operations, right? And it leads to potential loss of knowledge and skill sets. But in many cases, it's not clear whether the departure of specific employees actually results in a decrease in the profits, right? So in some cases, a departing employee may actually be replaced by a good one, and you'll actually be performing better. So you can't just say that people leaving is basically having an impact on the profitability of the organization. So asking why in this case is important to understand whether it actually impacts the actual outcome that you need to monitor. So these analyses can help us highlight which metrics are more critical and to provide a framework on how change in these metrics should be understood. So building a capacity to understand these causal relationships and sequences of outcomes is very important for workforce analytics. So how can we use HR metrics and you put it to good use, and how can we put analytics to good use? So reporting HR metrics alone is ineffective, it's useless. So it doesn't lead to improvement in managerial decisions. So data points representing important organizational outcomes become useful when the decision maker can use those informations and can attach some meaning. So data will need to be placed in some context. For example, knowing that an organization's turnover level for newly hired management trainees is about 13% is far more useful when it is placed in a context. For instance, compared to previous turnover history. Is the turnover increasing or decreasing? So if I just say it's 13%, it's useless. Has it increased? Has it decreased? Maybe it's decreased. So benchmarking is a second means to putting data into sense. So you compare it with other standards in the industry to understand whether your HR metrics are following or are increasing or are getting better, to better understand it. So you need to put it into context using benchmarking. That's another way. So reporting what we find. So reporting metrics incorporate decisions about what metrics will be reported. Of course, you need to decide which ones to report, how these metrics will be shown, how, when, and to whom they will be reported. So effort has been focused on attempting to identify what metrics an organization should use. However, we need to also identify what metrics should be reported without considering the without considering the organization's problems and opportunities. Misses the reasons for the metrics, right? That will happen. Because if you don't know why they are being reporting or why we're trying to identify them, this will happen. So how metrics should be reported focuses on depicting the metrics for decision makers so that the message is relevant to them. So how they're reported is very important. So how questions deal with choosing between distributing metrics to decision makers, using or creating opportunities for decision makers to extract metrics. So this is why it's important. The when question deals with the timing. When should we show them these? Annually, or on an annual basis, on a quarter basis, on a daily basis, on a monthly basis? When should we be reporting these metrics? And to whom? It's very important, because if you show it to people who cannot make any sense out of it or cannot really make decisions based on it, then it's useless. So we need to show it to the right people. So to the right people at the right time, and how we're going to present it, that's the important part. So HR metrics and workforce analytics information can be reported in a number of ways. So generally it's a combination of push and pull systems, which means in some cases the push systems are excellent because we are getting the information to the decision maker, and pull systems are basically where managers actually ask for that information. So examples include posting HR metrics and analytics analysis reports into company websites. You're putting it there, so it's making information available to the managers so they can access it whenever they want. Push would be when you're sending it to them. So if you're going to send irrelevant information to them when they don't want it, that would also be a bad thing, and they would not pay attention to the important messages later on then. So how frequently data is analyzed and reported is also an important consideration. The existence of an integrated HRIS and better computing facilities means a lot more data is generated and analyzed and can be reported, but overabundance of it is a waste. So aggregating or summarizing a lot of data from a lot of divisions into one big chunk is again might be useless. So we need to have it for each department separately, instead of having it combined together. Then we come up to the idea of HR dashboards. Now dashboards, we've already seen them in Orange HRM. They represent these metrics in a much more easier way to see and to understand. You can drill down, which means you can go into more specifics. Sort of a departmental piece of information, you go to specific teams or to units or to individuals, or you could roll up, which means instead of looking at one individual or a couple of individuals, you can look at the entire division or a particular department. So these individuals, when these dashboards give you these information, it's a much better way of reporting things. We've already seen the dashboards available in Orange HRM and ICE HRM, in Centrifugo, in Web HR, all of these. So there are some useful things that you need to remember about HR metrics and their analytics. Don't do metrics, which is that the primary objective of developing capability in HR metrics for analytics is to increase effectiveness. Don't just do them for the heck of it. Don't just create them just for the heck of it. Simply conducting them and doing those analysis is just raising cost. It's useless. Do it only when you're trying to solve a problem or an opportunity that you're trying to grab. Bigger is not always better. The success of any HR metrics or analytics project is not measured by how many people are involved, but is gauged by the impact that those results have. So having a huge team doing this or spending a lot of millions of dollars trying to come up with more metrics is not the solution, but coming up with the right metrics that actually help is. HR metrics analytics is a journey, not a destination. It's an overall process. You'll keep on collecting this data, and that will help you make better decisions. And over time, you'll continue to make better decisions. It's not going to happen just in a one day. It's not just a destination. It will never end. It will keep on happening. Then the other lesson is to be willing to learn. As organizations, we will need to keep on learning which HR metrics are better and which are not, and keep on trying different ones until we keep. So there's no end result to it. There's no ending to it. You have to keep on learning how to do better metrics, which ones work for you, which ones don't. And again, you need to avoid trying to measure everything. Not everything needs to be measured. So unless there's an opportunity out there, unless there's a problem you need to solve, don't measure it. Don't waste the resources and time to do that. So what's the future of analytics like? The future of analytics is likely going to be that it's important. It's going to be much more important. It's going to be the competitive advantage for organizations, but doing it effectively is the key, and doing it in a manner that it can actually be used for making decisions is the key. So there are some managerial benefits of metrics to organizations. They're going to have operational reporting. It's going to become more efficient, more cost effective, because obviously the data from individual applications is integrated. There'll be more graphical information that will be that will give you more benefit, and lots of human resource practices and investment can be optimized to meet those enterprise goals. So that's the future. So as a result, organizations will be investing more and more into getting HR metrics and more into workforce analytics. More benchmarking would be done, because that will help you better understand where you stand as an organization. So a lot more data has been collected already, and a lot more will be collected that will help you make better benchmarking for your HR metrics and your workforce analytics. So that's pretty much it for this particular chapter. Thank you.